0.8% of the GDP, but unfortunately it is projected to go back up in 2006 to approximately 3.8% of the GDP. The decline in 2005 was actually a welcomed accident, and now the challenge for the government will be to reduce the deficit on its own terms. Once this requirement is met, the only economic criteria that remains is the membership in the European exchange rate mechanism, the ERM2, for at least 2 years. Within the ERM2, the government will be forced to keep its currency, the koruna, within a close value of the euro.
Isn't this a potentially risky move that could jeopardize the stability of the Czech economy?
Obviously it is, because once this is done, the koruna will be dependent on the value of the euro, giving the Czech government less control over its economic stability. More specifically, things like inflation and price increases. If you look at other countries that have already adopted the euro, you'll notice that their inflation actually increased, which is a major cause of concern for Czech officials.
Now that we've heard about some of the challenges facing the Czech Republic, Medupe, could you tell us some solutions?
Well, the best way to ensure that the Czech economy can survive any economic shocks that may come its way is to make sure its economy is as strong as it can be before it enters ERM2. Because once it does that, there's no turning back. It must either adopt the euro as soon as possible or watch their economy stop growing. Right now, the government is taking steps to lower its deficit. Public financing needs to be reformed now. Though currently stable, if they do not change, then the debt and the deficit will spiral out of control within decades. The key to the whole situation is public spending. Policies need to be augmented to reflect the changing social demographics. As Steve has already said, the Czech Republic and the rest of Europe went through the baby boom and is now a victim to its aging population. The current pay-as-you-go pension system will not be able to support the new retirees. You see, with pay-as-you-go, the working population pays for the retirement of the older generations. But with more and more people retiring and population decline, the system cannot continue. A new system had to be created, one that merged features of the old with a new one that promised greater returns and put the responsibility of pension into the hands of those receiving the money. It would involve 3 pillars. The first would be a continuation of the current pay-as-you-go system. The second would be part of the fully funded mandatory insurance scheme, or FF. Those with children would receive FF payment discounts, and those with 3 or more would cease FF payments, because theoretically, when your children work, they're paying for your retirement. The third would be open to any Czechs who wish to receive more money than they were already guaranteed, which could inadvertently encourage Czechs to save more. The other needed public finance reform is healthcare. National healthcare under communism actually had an increased death rate, and though the Reformation that began in the early 90s had a lot of momentum behind it, that has since declined. Within the system, there is an oversupply of acute beds, not enough long-term rehabilitation beds, and too many specialists. The government tried to lower the number of physicians in the country, but the only result was doctor backlash. Physicians who already thought they weren't getting paid the salaries they deserved just created another roadblock to reform. Also, healthcare professionals need to be better trained, and they need more schools for general practitioners and for nurses, possibly by converting some medical schools. Healthcare reform has a long way to go, and with or without the adoption of the euro, this and pension reform need to happen.
Are economic factors the only aspects holding up the adoption of the euro?
Of course not. Public opinion also plays a very significant role in whether politicians will adopt the economic reforms necessary in adopting the euro. Overall, the public opinion is split over whether adoption of the euro will be beneficial to the public, because very few are actually educated about the implications of the transition. If you look at a European Commission survey taken in September of 2005, you'll notice that under half the population is interested in euro adoption. Also, less than half the population is aware that euro adoption is an obligation and not an option, and even fewer people are aware of how many countries have already adopted the euro. Finally, a great fear of being cheated in the conversion from the koruna to the euro is another obstacle that the government is going to have to overcome if it wants to gain the public support necessary in adopting the euro.
The government needs to take steps to ensure that the population knows exactly what's going on economically within their own country and the rest of Europe. One possible way is to increase how often information on the euro is given in the news and on the radio, which has the potential of increasing the awareness level of the population. Also, schools could be encouraged to give their students more information, and that knowledge could filter into the homes. There are cost-efficient ways for the government to get its message out there.
Absolutely. Most recently, the public perspective in reference to the euro was evident in the Czech elections to the Chamber of Deputies on June 2nd and 3rd. The Czech Business Weekly reported that the elections were very close, with the conservative Civic Democratic Party gaining a slight edge over the other major political party, the Social Democrats. This outcome reflects the negative public opinion towards the euro because the Civic Democrats are known for being against euro adoption. In addition, the Civic Democrats plan to implement public finance reforms, namely in health care and pension plans, as you've already mentioned, Dupe, are necessary in adoption of the euro. Now the problem is that these are time-consuming and costly goals that most likely will prevent euro adoption as projected in 2010. Thus, the Civic Democrats create even more challenges in the transition.
This has been a very fascinating and informative conversation. I'd like to thank you all for being here. We should note that both the Czech Republic and the European Union face obstacles in the road to progress and in the road to advancement. But thus far, advancement has been promising. We should note that the European Union and the Czech Republic should proceed with cautious optimism and possibly delay the 2010 deadline for the adoption of the euro. Thank you.
For the excellent presentation. As any of my colleagues wants to start?
Yes, you talked about the Lisbon Agenda as something that's been there from 2000, and it's a benchmark for the European countries. It's clearly necessary for European to promote European growth, dynamism in the European growth. It's very obvious what needs to be done in the Lisbon Agenda. What's keeping that from being adopted? And that reluctance or whatever to adopt it, what implications will that have on the Czech Republic?
The Lisbon Agenda calls for large reductions in unemployment, and it also calls for several other things, including an increase in the funding of R&D. Currently in the European Union, this is a large point of concern because nations are not so sure that they can reach the goals outlined by the Lisbon Agenda by the year 2010. Some find it to be unrealistic. To reach that goal, where there's only 4 years left, it would require sweeping economic changes, which many countries are not willing to do. They're not willing to submit their national authority to the broader European Union to achieve a goal that they think is unrealistic. Within the Czech Republic, there is an air of skepticism towards allowing them to be controlled by distant bureaucrats. As a former communist nation, they're wary of having their economic policy dictated to them. At this point, they prefer a more relaxed pace.
In addition to what Ben said, the Czech Republic is a little skeptical, like he said, of the willingness of the European Union to treat the new members as fairly as the old members. There's been some points of disagreement with that. And so they really have trouble giving up their national sovereignty to the European Union.
Could you elaborate on some of those points of disagreement?
Well, actually, recently there has been poultry dumping in the Czech Republic by some of the wealthier members of the EU. The Minister of Agriculture has complained about this because bird flu is sweeping Western Europe, and the meat market is pretty much down. The Czech Republic still has a prosperous meat market, and countries, especially Italy, are dumping their poultry in the Czech Republic for prices that the Czech Republic just cannot compete with. They just can't make a profit off of it. So that's been a really sore point between new members and old members. And the Minister of Agriculture has actually said that he will seek protective measures from Brussels against this poultry dumping.